Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a pretty provocative idea. What if, for an entire generation, the future has become something not to look forward to, but something to, well, escape? You know, it all starts with this really startling observation from one commentator who's been talking with people in their 70s and 80s. He's finding that for a lot of them, it's not just a feeling of being left behind. Nope, it's a deep-seated belief that society is just heading in the wrong direction, and a real sense of relief that they won't be around to see how it all ends. So the big question is, what's driving this? We're about to explore one really compelling theory that points to three key things: the rise of distrust in technology, a fundamental shift in our cultural values, and a communication gap that feels wider than it's ever been. Okay, so let's start with that core observation. According to the source of this whole analysis, the sentiment he keeps hearing over and over is that the world isn't just evolving, it's becoming completely unrecognizable. For this older generation, it feels like it's heading in a fundamentally wrong direction. And you have to understand, this perspective is grounded in a lifetime of listening. The commentator talks about being a kid who is just mesmerized by the stories from his elders. We're talking people who lived through the Great Depression and 2 world wars. He really absorbed their view of the world, a view that was forged in a very, very different time. All right, so the first big reason for this alienation is what the speaker calls the rise of fakeness. And this is all driven by modern tech and the way it's eroding trust and authenticity. The main thing driving this feeling, he argues, is the rapid rise of artificial intelligence. And look, it's not just about learning how to use a new phone. It's a much deeper anxiety that reality itself is becoming unstable, that it's just getting harder and harder to trust what you see and hear. I mean, think about it. You've got sophisticated AI deepfakes and an endless stream of digital scams, and they're often targeting a generation that was raised to believe that a person's word was their bond. This clash creates a world that to them feels fundamentally dishonest and, frankly, pretty dangerous. But it's not just about the tech. The speaker also points to this profound communication and cultural divide that seems to be separating the generations more than ever before. And here's where you can really see the core disconnect. On one side, a generation that grew up valuing face-to-face interaction. On the other, a generation raised on screens, where communication happens in just seconds. And the speaker adds a really crucial point here. He argues that tech companies are actively designing a future that has no place for baby boomers, basically making them obsolete on purpose. This quote from the source just perfectly captures that clash in communication. Grandpa, if you're going to tell a story, you better tell it in 3 seconds. The slow, thoughtful storytelling of an older generation just can't compete with the modern demand for instant information. It leaves them feeling totally unheard. So, you take this feeling of fakeness, you take this massive communication gap. How does it all come together? Well, the speaker uses this really powerful metaphor to describe what's happening: an invisible cage. He argues that we are all building what he calls an invisible cage around ourselves. It's a whole system of rules and regulations and surveillance that, sometimes subtly and sometimes not so subtly, just limits our freedom. According to this theory, the process is gradual. It's a slow burn. A generation that actually remembers a time with fewer rules can see the cage being built. They can see the bars going up. But for younger people born inside of it, constant surveillance and all these restrictive rules, that's not a loss of freedom. That's just normal. This idea is absolutely central to the whole argument. What one generation sees as a totally unacceptable attack on their liberty, the next generation just accepts as the way the world works. Because, hey, they've never known anything different. So, this brings us to the speaker's big conclusion about where the older generation fits into this rapidly changing landscape. Or, maybe more accurately, where they don't. He uses the metaphor of a dinosaur to describe them. Now think about that. They were perfectly adapted for the world they were born into, but the environment has changed so drastically that their skills, their values, their whole way of being, they just aren't suited for survival anymore. But he's really quick to point out that this is not a criticism, not at all. It's an acknowledgement that the world itself has changed. Dinosaurs were incredibly successful in their era, right? It was the world that left them behind, not the other way around. In fact, he argues these dinosaurs have a kind of toughness or ruggedness that was forged by hardship that's almost unimaginable to us today. He even references a line from the character Curly in the movie City Slickers to illustrate this profound, rugged strength that came from surviving a much, much tougher world. So what you're left with is this really stark contrast. The older generation, the dinosaurs, they can't handle this new world of surveillance and tech. But on the flip side, the younger generation probably couldn't handle the harsh realities of the old world. So as these voices of reason from the past die off, a new generation, one that's better adapted to the cage, takes over. And that leaves us with this final thought. According to this perspective, every single generational shift involves a trade-off. Ruggedness is traded for adaptability. Maybe freedom is traded for a feeling of safety. As one world fades away and another one emerges, we're all left to consider what values we're carrying forward and which ones we're leaving behind.